Tonight, the agony of survivors of rape and sexual assault waiting years to have their day in court. As a new report shows, victims are among those waiting the longest, leading to PTSD and suicidal thoughts. I'll speak to the Crown Prosecution Service. Plus, Labour unveils its employment rights plan. One business group says it's chaotic and poorly planned. The Unite union, though, says it doesn't go far enough. Many of the major changes have been delayed, so what's going on? I'll be joined by the Employment Minister, Alison McGovern. As government departments battle for cash in this month's budget, a warning that Rachel Reeves may need to raise taxes by £25 billion. We'll explain. And as Keir Starmer marks 100 days in office this weekend, we've been looking at some other famous milestones, and we've got a little quiz for you. All that and more with Caroline Flint and Samwa Shah, who'll be marking 60 minutes with me tonight. It's Thursday, I'm Sophy Ridge live from Westminster, and this is the Politics Hub. Good evening. All that still to come, of course. But first, I just want to get the latest on the major story we're covering today, Hurricane Milton. Now, President Biden has warned everyone impacted by the storm to remain inside and off the roads. 10 people are known to have died, 4 of them killed by tornadoes in St. Lucie County on the east coast of the state. Well, our US correspondent Mark Stone is in Clearwater in Florida for us. Mark, what can you tell us?
Well, let me show you the scene where we are at the moment. We found an area of Clearwater which is north of where the eye of the storm hit landfall overnight. You can see some of the cars here in a community, a housing community that has been flooded. Those orange crosses on the back of each car show that the authorities have checked them, that they've checked that there is nobody inside. Some of the buildings as well also got crosses on. This is one community of many right up and down parts of Florida that have been impacted by Hurricane Milton. But it is clear, as the day has gone on, that this was not what the authorities were fearing. It was described as a storm of a century, a tidal surge perhaps, or a storm surge, I should say, of the like that no living generation has ever seen before. Well, that has not come to pass, which is clearly a great relief to a great many people. You can see some of those who live here, who've clearly had to evacuate, hoping to get back to their homes as soon as they can. Sophie, as is often always the case, it is the poorer communities, those who are least able to cope with this that are affected the most, and that's certainly the case with the people who live here, because it's been built in a bowl effectively. Much of the town is not damaged at all, but flooding here clearly a problem for them. The structural damage, whether it be here or down the coast where we drove through over the course of the day, is minimal, and that is, I think, because the winds were not nearly as strong as had been feared. There was an expectation when it was a Category 5 out at sea that maybe it would remain that, but it came down to a Category 3. That meant that the winds were not as strong, still very strong, but not strong enough to bring down many buildings. But of course, Category 3 still means a significant storm surge, and that is what you're seeing here. The flooding here is a consequence of storm surges that we saw, not to the amount expected, but still to an amount to cause significant disruption for very many people.
Mark, thank you very much indeed. Mark Stone there with the latest on Hurricane Milton and the impact. Now, a story that we're covering tonight is one that's very important to me, and I'm sure many of you as well. A few years ago, I visited a rape crisis centre to find out more about the work that they do to help survivors. Now, it was an amazing place, run by some really dedicated women. But when I was there, they said something that at the time really shocked me. They told me that they don't advise women and girls who've been raped or sexually assaulted to go to court. Now, obviously, they'll support them if they do decide that they want to pursue a criminal case, but they don't specifically advise them to do so. Now, I was really surprised. Why wouldn't you want to get justice for these awful crimes? So I then asked them why that was their policy. And they told me, look, the court process is really traumatic. You could wait years. You could be victim blamed in court. You could be re-traumatised. And then after all of that, you might not get justice at the end of it. They might get off. So they told me that, knowing all that, they can't hand on heart tell victims that putting your faith in the British justice system is necessarily the right thing to do. Well, I got it then, I understood it. It's pretty depressing though, isn't it? Because obviously the result is victims not getting justice, and rapists, well, it means rapists getting away with it, doesn't it? Today on the show, we're taking a long, hard look at how the justice system is dealing with sexual violence. A new report by the Criminal Bar Association shows survivors of rape and sexual assault are among those waiting the longest for their cases to be heard, leading to PTSD and suicidal thoughts. It takes on average 2 years to get a trial from the point of charge, and of course some are having to wait even longer. First, let's watch this very powerful report by our correspondent, Ashna Horinag.
The wait between being a victim of crime and awaiting the trial has never been so long. Survivors of alleged sexual offences are among those waiting the longest for justice. On average, almost 2 years. Emmy waited 5.
Agony. It just got to the point where I kept saying to my court therapist, like, I don't want to do it anymore. And she kept saying, like, you know, give it a week, see if you still feel that way, because it'd be... Leading up to it, I'd be like a very anxious mess. I'd constantly feel nauseous, I wouldn't have an appetite, I wouldn't be sleeping very well. I'd have like panic, like multiple a day.
The trial was postponed 8 times. Sometimes you would only find out that morning.
I'd already gotten ready, tried to hype myself up, had all this adrenaline going. And then because it didn't happen, it had nowhere to go but turn into an anxiety attack.
As of March, a record 10,141 sexual offences cases in England and Wales hadn't been given a Crown Court date, a backlog that's been building for years. This is a multifaceted mess. There are issues and shortages with judges and barristers and a distinct lack of courtroom availability. Add in pandemic delays and issues around scheduling, and it feels like a justice system at breaking point. One that's breaking the lives of those directly involved, helping survivors navigate the process are advisors like Fionn.
You don't really realise, do you, what you're walking into when you report sometimes, of just how lengthy it's going to be. I know it's frustrating, but the further actions are only to strengthen your case.
Fionn makes countless reassuring calls like this every week. A new report by charity Victim Support has found the delays are leading to survivors self-harming and being diagnosed with PTSD.
Our job is to manage expectations. Reporting is obviously hard in itself, and you do your interview and then it suddenly becomes quite static and you don't hear anything back for a while.
Sky News has learned some cases aren't being scheduled till 2027.
You must put these cases as a priority. There must be a court available for them, a judge available for them, increase the funding for those who deal with these cases. We need more specially trained police officers. We need more specially trained barristers to prosecute and defend.
Emmy's trial eventually went ahead this year. The defendant was found not guilty. Afterwards, the judge wrote to her and acknowledged the 5-year wait.
You've had to suffer emotionally distressing and inordinate delay. The delay is
The Ministry of Justice told us they've inherited a criminal justice system crisis, with cases delayed for far too long. They say they'll address this deep injustice to fast-track rape cases so victims and survivors have the experience they deserve. But for those waiting, it feels like their lives are on hold. Ashna Horinag, Sky News.
I promise you we are going to be coming back to that story, but we are just going to, in the meantime, just dip into what the President is saying about Hurricane Milton.
Right now. And I think the Congress should be coming back and moving on the emergency needs immediately. And they're going to have to come back after the election as well, because this is going to be a long haul for total rebuilding. It's going to take several $1 billion. It's not going to be a matter of just a little bit. But we're providing now to make sure people have the emergency relief they need. The dollars just to be able to get a prescription filled, to get a baby formula done. All the things, that $750 that they're talking about, but Mr. Trump and all those other people know it's a lie to suggest that's all they're going to get. That's bizarre. It's bizarre. They got to stop this. They're being so damn un-American with the way they're talking about this stuff. But there's going to be a need for significant amounts of money. We're already underway at trying to calculate what the cost will be, because we don't want to mislead anybody. We want to make sure all the costs are able to be covered.
Have you spoken to Speaker Johnson about coming back before the election to vote?
No, I haven't.
Mr. President, so are you calling on Congress to come back early?
I think Congress should move as rapidly as they can, particularly on the most immediate need, which is small business.
But the Vice President said yesterday that FEMA has what it needs. There's enough resources. The Congress does not need to come back, right?
FEMA has its needs. That's different than SBA.
Okay, so it's SBA. They need to come back and do SBA.
Yeah, but they're going to need a lot more.
Mr. President, what did Prime Minister Netanyahu tell you about his plans relating to retaliation?
He's coming over to help with the storm.
Mr. President, have you spoken with former President Trump at all?
Are you kidding me? Mr. President Trump, former President Trump, get a life, man. Help these people.
Will you hold him accountable? You said you were going to hold those accountable.
Public will hold them accountable. You better than the press hold them accountable because you know the truth.
Do you plan to speak with former President Trump?
No.
I love it.
Are you kidding me, said President Biden when asked if he'd been speaking to Donald Trump, who was clearly only keen to talk directly about Hurricane Milton. 10 people there dead after Hurricane Milton hit Florida. Well, a little bit earlier, of course, I spoke to a woman called Baljet Ubney. She's the Director of Strategy and Policy at the Crown Prosecution Service. And of course, this is in relation to the story that we are covering about the long delays that survivors of sexual violence are facing in Britain's courts. I started by asking her reaction to the case of Emmy that we saw in Ashna Horinag's report a short time ago.
It's really disheartening to hear that story, and I know that that's not uncommon, and that's what the report that Victim Support have published today highlights, that there are some huge challenges within the criminal justice system. Really acknowledge that, the time, the delay, the adjournments, and so actually how we look after victims is really, really key. And I think what this report does is gives us a real insight into some of the things that we need to focus on.
Look, I get that if you're the victim of any crime, having to wait 5 years is pretty annoying, pretty bad. But if you're the victim of a sexual crime, it must be awful. You must be just stuck in that limbo, like unable to move on, re-traumatised. I can't really imagine.
I think it is particularly difficult for victims who are victims of sexual crime to deal with the delays and, as you say, the emotional turmoil if you think your case is going to go on and then it doesn't, and then you're back to square one.
So you're building yourself up and then it doesn't happen.
Absolutely. So I think absolutely across the system we need to look at what more we can do to make sure we can reduce those delays, but also how we can reduce adjournments and make sure that cases actually get on when they're supposed to. But in amongst all of that, and what this report highlights is sometimes if victims actually know what's going on and why there's an adjournment, that can make a massive difference. And that's where I think how we communicate with victims and how we support them is really, really key. And I think that's what this report also says, that sometimes victims don't understand why the case is adjourned. That's not done in a timely way, and there's more we can do about that.
So adjournments, that's when the case is supposed to be going ahead and it's cancelled, delays. Why are they happening so often? What is going on?
There can be a large number of different reasons for why adjournments happen, so there isn't a sort of single reason. So it's hard to answer that question. I think the key thing is that we know about that sooner, we can communicate that more effectively to victims.
But why are the delays happening, though? Because that's something we do know. We're getting these year-long delays, multiple year-long delays. Why?
I think the fact that there are sort of large backlogs, particularly in our Crown courts, has been well documented. That does present a challenge, but there is work going on to look at what more we can do about that across the whole system. But it is a reality of the system at the moment. I do think, as I said, I think there's more that we can do. What this report highlights is the incredible role that independent sexual violence advisors play and how they can really support victims. And that really comes out in this report. I think there's a lot more that the CPS and police are doing now and can do to build better links. So some of the things we're doing in the CPS, we have introduced through some of the joint work we're doing to improve our service to victims of rape is to have victim liaison officers. So their role will very much be focused on how can we support victims, what do they need, what kind of special measures is different ways you can give your evidence. How can we make sure we understand what's really going to help victims? It's really important that we treat victims as individuals as well. It's not a one-size-fits-all. So having that communication between the independent sexual violence advisor, the police officer, prosecutor, coming together and really supporting that victim is really critical. And that's what those new roles will do.
The communication, as you say, is critical. But at the same time, the backlog, the delay is still there. And I know you're not going to want to get too drawn into the politics, but does there just need to be a bit more money? Is this the result of kind of years of squeezing that Ministry of Justice budget?
And obviously, we are not responsible for listing in the Crown Prosecution Service, so our focus is very much.
You'll know though. You're involved in all this. You'll see it firsthand. What's your view?
I mean, it is a challenging environment, and I think we're all trying to do the best within that context. I think what I'm interested in focusing on is what can we do? Because one of the things in that report...
Are you hopeful that, having a former head of the CPS in Keir Starmer might mean he gets it, he might send you a bit more money?
I don't think it's right for me to comment on what may or may not happen in terms of the budget. Coming back to this report, though, I think there are things that it highlights that we can do. The report talks very much about what happens at court. It talks about the fact that there are still harmful misconceptions and that can filter into how the court process works.
Fewer than 3 in 100 rapes recorded by police between April 23 and March 2024 resulted in someone being charged that year. Now, I know that's not just on the CPS, obviously, that's partly the police as well, but do you take some responsibility for that number being so low?
Absolutely. I mean, we recognise that the number of cases that come into the system are the tip of the iceberg. And actually a few years ago, because the numbers had dropped so significantly, that's why we started the work on what we call Operation Soteria, which is a joint programme of work between the police and the CPS to really think about how can we get more cases into the system. So we absolutely recognise there was work for us to do. What I would say is we have seen, since we introduced that programme 3 years ago, a significant increase in the number of cases that both the police are referring to us and that we are charging. We are not complacent. We know that's the tip of the iceberg. But what I think that has taught us is when we work really well and in partnership with the police and with independent sexual violence advisors, we can get victims to have the confidence to come forward.
It's not always great, though, is it? I have to say, the Victims Commissioner report asked 3,000 victims if they were confident the CPS is effective at prosecuting people accused of committing crimes. 63% said they were not confident. Only 30% said they're confident.
No, absolutely. We take those that feedback really seriously. We know that we have got more to do to build confidence in victims of rape in the work that we are doing and to just explain what we do and what we can offer. So absolutely more work for us to do. And that's why it's really important for us to come along and say, we really care about this. We are doing lots of work to improve what we can do within a challenging context, but we really do want to make a difference for victims of rape.
OK, thank you so much for being on the programme. Thank you.
Thank you.
Right, let's bring in our duo for this evening, shall we? The former Labour Minister, Caroline Flint, and the former Conservative Special Advisor, Sam Ashar. Great to have you both with us. I think it's fair to say you were both getting slightly agitated by the interview.
I have to say, Caroline and I completely agree that the interview that was just given by the CPS was incredibly disappointing because it wasn't just about sort of listing what we already now know in this report. The Criminal Bar Association didn't need to put this report out in order for the CPS to be aware of these issues. It's actually, in fact, highlighting it to people like us who are on the outside who need to be made aware of these issues so we can apply that requisite pressure to the CPS. And I feel that a little bit of that interview was actually I mean, forgive me for using this phrase, but mealy-mouthed. It was sort of like, yes, we want victims of rape to come forward. And the point that you made whilst we were watching this is that when victims of rape come forward, they are not given any sort of guarantee of justice. And so how do you expect to fulfil that confidence when this is what's happening in the system? I have to say, I was really disappointed with hearing that.
Well, I agree. And I didn't hear one answer in that interview that addressed the question or gave any idea of a solution to breaking the logjam of so many cases held for years and years and years. And you look, I'm not against having, you know, special advisors, training, support for women to come forward. But, you know, if you're not getting the outcomes that lead to actually effective justice within what I would say is a reasonable frame of time, then, you know, whatever good is going in at the front end is not being, you know, actually complemented by the outcomes. And this has been going on for years. This is not new. I think you made a really good point there. I would like, you know, for once to hear the CPS coming out before a report's done to say, this is what we're doing. This is where the logjams are. If it's about money, yes, but actually if it's a cultural thing around the way the whole system works, the inability to maybe run specialist courts that can deal with these cases that run 7 days a week or whatever, that may be asking too much. I want to have something that's proactive. I don't want to hear nothing coming out the mouth of CPS when a report by another organisation comes out to tell us what we've known for years.
But this is the other thing, you know, some of the stuff that she was talking about, you would have expected that to be par for the course in terms of victims of sexual assault or rape, that you would have these specialist trained officers. And I know that obviously the CPS sits in the middle between the police and the courts, so that whole system has to work together. Yes, there are absolutely questions around whether the police can do more to recruit those specialist trained people who can handle these cases and collect evidence effectively in these cases as well. And then there is the issue with courts and the space and judges and barristers being available. But you know, there is a triage system, a triage process that the CPS could improve. There is lots of stuff that they could do. You know, she's the director of strategy. Where are, as you say, the ideas that say to us, this is how we're going to move it forward?
CPS is just one part of this complex, kind of depressing story about how, you know, we deal with these, you know, serious violence against women and girls. Caroline, we've heard a lot, haven't we, from the new Labour administration about how they want to make this a priority, about how it's a national emergency. But I have to say, you know, a big part of this is money as well, isn't it? The Ministry of Justice is not a protected budget. Do they need to prioritise it?
Well, you know, I think whether it's the Home Office and the work Jess Phillips is doing there, Shabana in the Ministry of Justice, the agencies like the CPS, they all need to sort of work together, because we can't sort of have a one end of the system where police are being more active in regard to victims of sexual violence, doing their part, and then it just all, you know, gets, you know, runs into the buffers because nothing happens. And let's not forget that actually in a lot of these cases, the alleged criminal is given bail. Now, everyone's entitled to their day in court. But if that's bail for a few months or even 6 months, that's one thing. But 2 to 3 years, whilst the women, they are overwhelming women who are the victims of sexual violence, are in a prison of their own while this is happening. And whilst there might be protections for those women from those who they are alleging have committed this crime to not approach them, they could be living in the community still, close to where those women are. So they have to think about delivery. Now, you know, Labour has said it wants to be a mission-led government. And for me, mission-led government is not just about having lots of policies, it's about having a logistical delivery mechanism to make things happen. And just to say, we saw in the summer, quite rightly, when those riots were happening, very firm action by the government, working with all the agencies to get those courts meeting, to get people charged and to be have a trial and, in some cases, obviously have sentences. A lot of the public will be thinking, if you can do that for that, why can't you do it for this?
Can I just, on the financial point,
quickly,
it's not just about the amount of money, it's about where you're spending it. And I think if you're looking at being efficient, it's about modernisation. So come up with the ideas and let's be effective about the way we spend money.
So about the use of money as well. Thanks both very much. I can tell it's something you feel really strongly about, so it's really good to speak to you about it this evening. Thank you. Now, I want to talk about Labour's big policy announcement today, the biggest boost to pay and productivity in the workplace in a generation. That's the boast of the government today, as it published its employment rights bill, squeezed in just in time to make its first 100 days in office. Now, it's been pretty warmly received by the unions, but will it deliver lasting change without damaging the economy? Here's our business correspondent, Paul Kelso.
Delivering on workers' rights. The Deputy Prime Minister and Business Secretary sharing the heavy lifting on reforms that extend protection from unfair dismissal and improve sick pay and parental leave.
These packages are pro-business and pro-worker, and we've worked with businesses, big, small, medium, all over the country, and we've had many of them welcome the measures that we're saying. We've acknowledged some of the challenges around these are a huge reform package, so therefore we're going to make sure that they're part of the process.
There are measures to protect more than 1 million zero-hours workers like Zoe, a carer looking after the most vulnerable in society, who hopes employers will now better look after her.
I do think having decent contracts, having job security and feeling confident every day that your job has some respect for you will boost a lot of morale and go one step to getting everything that we deserve.
The reforms will not be quick. Many of the measures won't become law for at least 2 years, and moves to tackle inequality in the gig economy by creating a single category of worker even longer.
This legislation is an attempt to deliver on one key election promise to improve workers' rights without compromising another, the delivery of economic growth. They should be complementary. Happier workers should be more productive and everybody wins. But in reality, this has been a point of tension with business, and this policy is full of compromise.
Unions would like change sooner, but say concerns about the cost are misplaced.
We've tested, haven't we, for the last 14 years to destruction the idea that somehow low-skilled, insecure employment is the driver of economic growth. What we've had is effectively economic stagnation and fall in real terms wages. So I think this is a package of measures that will boost the incomes of millions of working people, but crucially will also provide a much-needed kickstart to the UK economy as well.
In an economy short on froth, businesses large and small fear extending rights equals rising costs and bigger risks.
We've already got good practices, we already care a lot about our employees, but we need to be able to be supported in order to upkeep those good practices in what are fairly challenging times on the high street.
Millions will be better off as a result of reforms that attempt to satisfy unions and business. Ministers hope both will see their cup as half full. Paul Kelso, Sky News.
He came on air, I spoke to the Work and Pensions Minister, Alison McGovern. Thank you so much for being on the programme tonight. It's great to have you. So let's talk about your workers' rights bill, shall we? It's a big part, of course, of your election campaign. But it feels to me like a lot of the major changes have been a bit delayed. You know, unfair dismissal, maternity pay from day one, years away. You know, the right to switch off kicked even further down the road. I mean, you guys ran on a change platform. What happened? Did you just lose your confidence?
Not at all. Some of the changes that are in this bill, on a personal level, I have been trying to bring about for 14 years. You know, for example, the restriction for unwanted zero-hours contracts, that's been a massive problem in our economy for such a long time. And today is the day when we finally get to publish the bill that shows the way forward so that people aren't stuck not knowing how many hours they've got next week and not knowing what their income's going to be. So, of course, we will work with trade unions, with businesses, with charities and civil society to get this right. And that's not a quick process. But this is a big day today because we're publishing the legislation that is going to put a platform underneath working people.
One of the big things for so many people, particularly those with caring responsibilities, is the right to request flexible working. You know, the press release sounds pretty great. It says, you know, flexibility is at the heart of the legislation to upgrade the law to ensure it's fit for modern life and a modern economy. But I'll be honest, you know, I've looked at the actual bill and, you know, you can request flexible working, but then your employer, can refuse it on the following grounds: burden of additional costs, detrimental effort on ability to meet customers' demand, inability to reorganise work among existing staff, inability to recruit additional staff, detrimental impact on quality, detrimental impact on performance, insufficiency of work, planned structural changes, any other grounds specified by the Secretary of State. I mean, that is ridiculous. It sounds a bit like, yeah, you've got the right to request flexible working, but that's a bit like giving someone the right to, buy a ticket for the lottery.
The most important thing about that clause is that it changes the default. It changes the default assumption about what employment is like. And I think that we'll see how it goes. And, maybe we'll, as you say, maybe this will have an effect in the way that you're suggesting. I think the thing is, if you change the default, I think we'll see that expectation change. And we know that, like, in our history, we had the Equal Pay Act in the 70s. That was a really important, momentous moment. Not everything changed overnight, and we needed to keep going with the fight for equal pay. What we're putting in front of people today in a bill is the principles that we want to see. And people will have opinions about whether it will work in this way or that way, and that's fine. We'll work with people to get it right. But on flexible working, it's about changing that
working, though, you say it's about changing the defaults, but right now you can request flexible working, right? You obviously you can, but then your employer can refuse it. It feels to me like that's exactly the same position after the bill.
It's not the same because you don't have the right to do so in law, and also you read out.
There's no one stopping you asking. You're not banned from requesting it, are you?
No,
it's just the fact that you might not get given it, which is exactly the same as the bill.
Hang on a second, Sophie. The point about all of those clauses that you read out is that your employer has to give you a proper reason. And that process will make a difference, I believe. However, that is not the only change in this legislation today. There's lots of things. It's a big bill, and taken together, it's about the principle of putting a better platform underneath people. We've got too much poor quality, low paid work. In some cases, low pay and poor terms and conditions is some really highly skilled work, and that has got to change. So this is a big day today for all those people who've campaigned for a very long time for working people to do better by our economy.
You are consulting on a right to switch off. Is that something that you kind of follow yourself? Do you call your team members, out of working hours? Does Keir Starmer give you a ring on a Saturday?
I laughed because I thought you meant me personally, and I try very hard to switch off sometimes, and mostly it doesn't work. I try to make sure that we have good principles at work. Obviously in everyone's working life, occasionally there's an emergency, but yes, you try to respect people's personal time at weekends and when they're having family time. I do think that's an important principle.
Is there a problem with the fact that we're all on WhatsApp now? I mean this kind of genuinely. It's unlikely that you're going to, necessarily give someone a ring on their house phone at 9 p.m. at night, but you might send them a WhatsApp message. Is that acceptable if an employer, if your boss or your manager is WhatsApping you outside of working hours?
I think people do need time with their families, doing things outside work to give them time to relax and enjoy themselves. I think that is really important. And when I think about the mental health pressures that people are experiencing, having something to do and somewhere to be that's not work, I think is really important. We will keep talking to people about that and thinking about, what that should look like. Outside of this really important momentous day today where we're publishing this bill that's going to change the rights that people have at work, as a general principle, I think it is important that people are able to spend social time with their friends.
Another story that we're covering on the programme today is a new report revealing the huge delays that victims of rape and sexual violence are experiencing in the court system. I think the average wait for something to go to trial is 2 years. Now, I know it's something that you'll feel strongly about. I don't have to explain to you the impact that that's having on victims. Are we failing victims of sexual violence?
Goodness, it's absolutely devastating. Unfortunately, I've been working on the employment bill and other things like job centres today, and I haven't had time to read it yet. But that sounds absolutely devastating. And I know colleagues of mine, Jess Phillips and others, are working really hard to turn this around because that is not acceptable. It's absolutely devastating when something as horrific as rape happens to you. To have to go through that nightmare to get justice is not acceptable. So it's got to change.
I totally understand that you've got your head in something else, so you won't see the details, but we're all, of course, aware of the delays that have been building up in the court system and in the justice system. The budget's coming out. We've got some tough decisions about spending. Why is it that the Ministry of Justice Department budget is not protected when we're seeing the impact that these delays are having on victims of crime?
Well, I'm not the Chancellor and we're not at the budget yet, and I know you wouldn't expect me to comment on that directly. The thing that I would say is that the Ministry of Justice and colleagues are working very hard to turn this situation around. There's some difficulties. I visited my own rape and sexual abuse service only recently and heard about the difficulties that people have, not just in being believed, sadly, but also in finding the evidence. So it is about resources, but it's also about some of the technical difficulties now with mobile phones and other things. But we've got a mission to halve violence against women and girls. That's right across government, and ministers are working hard to make progress on that, as you imagine.
OK, thank you very much indeed. It was great to have you on the programme tonight. Thank you. Well, more reaction to the Workers' Bill is likely to feature in tomorrow's newspapers. We'll have our extended press preview and news review from 10:30 this evening with tonight's news and tomorrow's headlines. Joining us will be the Labour peer and broadcaster Baroness Hazarika and the political commentator Benedict Spence. Right, let's chat to Caroline and Salma again, shall we? Caroline, what do you make of the workers' rights legislation?
I think some of the measures that they're suggesting are overdue. I think, for example, on zero-hour contracts, I think in some cases for individuals they work really well and they like that flexibility. But I think what we've seen is a rise in these contracts being used for workers, maybe like the person you had in the film as a carer, where actually, they are doing quite long hours every week for over a sustained period, and they're still not given a contract that reflects that. And to be honest, I think that's something we probably should have dealt with better under the last Labour government. I think it was something that started growing then and has become more evident in our workforce. I think on things like flexible working, again, I think that's good. I thought it was interesting what you said about what's the difference between what we've got now in terms of request and the employer being able to say, well, I might not be able to do this, and a right, and the employer being able to say, we might not be able to do this. But again, I think, in many cases, just enabling people in workplaces, managers and others to have this conversation, in a lot of situations, with a bit of thinking and creativity, you could probably work it out for people. That's the age we live in today, and it's what's expected. But I would say maybe you would have thought some of this, and we were talking about this before, a lot of these details in this area would have been sorted out before, thinking with the businesses who are falling over themselves to speak to Labour, as well as obviously the trade union relationships. We might have had some other comments that were less hostile to what was being said than is the case.
What's your take? 'Cause it feels to me like there is a kind of genuine debate on this, and some people will be on a different side of the debate. Some people will say it's absolutely right to enshrine more protections for workers. Others will say, look, we're going for growth. It's all about making sure businesses can employ people and aren't put off that. What do you think?
I don't see it as an either or, right? And also, everybody's looking at it through the microcosm of employment rights. So you can be totally pro-employment rights as long as you get the balance right and you give businesses flexibility, and you can also want growth. The problem is it's not in this single conversation about this legislation. It is about having employment rights on this side and then looking at what the Treasury is going to do in terms of the budget, whether there's going to be any kind of tax break for businesses. We've already, we're going to talk about it later, but we've already had reports today that there's plans to add tax to pension contributions from employers. So there's this difficulty in that they're getting whacked on employment rights and then they're getting whacked on the financials as well. So there doesn't seem to be any sort of light for businesses at the end of the tunnel.
Do you think it feels like quite an anti-business government so far then?
Well, yeah, absolutely. And it's not. And Labour made a big play about being pro-business because they want to be pro-growth. If you're going to be pro-growth, then, as you say, where is the consultation with business on these measures? Most employers in the UK are good actors. People don't want to be unkind to their workforce. They want productive, happy workforces that create growth, create profit, create jobs. I think that being able to work with business, hand in glove with business, is something that Labour needs to get to do quickly and hopefully do before the budget, certainly, if there's going to be any kind of measures that are going to be detrimental to growth.
I think you're right about the fact that in terms of, having employment rights that actually help to sustain a workforce to be more productive, I think is a really good thing. And I think none of us would want to give back some of the rights as workers that we've had given to us over the years. But it isn't the only thing. It is also about creating the sort of jobs that can command better wages, that can actually train people for the skills that they're going to need to continue in that workforce. I think in this, what Labour really needs to consider as the sort of, the legislation, the discussion goes forward, is how they don't lose some sort of momentum on what they're trying to do here. Because from what I understand, on every measure, there will be a separate consultation and it could be 2 years before it comes in. Okay. And again, looking back, and we'll talk about later the 100 days, part of those 100 days of a new government is to be able to put out some really good announcements that give some real hope for delivery early on, but also to sort out some of these measures in a way that does bring, because you're going to have to bring both business and trade unions together on this for it to work.
We're going to talk more, as you say, about economy and business later on in the programme, because coming up next on the Politics Hub, are we headed for a tax bombshell in this month's budget? That is the £25 billion question. More on that next. Hello, welcome back. You're watching the Politics Hub. Now, we already know that this month's budget is going to contain measures to fill what the Chancellor believes is a multi-billion-pound black hole in the public finances. But it could be even worse than that, with the possibility that the Chancellor may need to raise taxes by £25 billion to prevent a return to austerity. Now, that's according to analysis by the Institute for Fiscal Studies. And it comes at a very delicate time when right now across Whitehall, departments are pleading their case and crucial decisions are being made. Here's Gurpreet Narwan.
In 3 weeks' time, we will get the new Labour government's first budget, and with it, we'll find out how the Chancellor plans to strike the balance between tax and spend. And here's the challenge. As you can see, government spending as a share of GDP, it's been rising. That spike there, that was the COVID years. And although it's been coming down, it's still projected to stay higher than it was before the pandemic. And things like higher debt interest payments, as well as social security payments, that's what's keeping that high. And as you can see, revenues, well, they're simply just not keeping up. So what choices does the Chancellor have? Well, she could try and bring government spending down, but there's very little appetite among the public for further cuts to government spending. In fact, Labour has already promised to increase government spending by £5 billion, and that's on top of the £9 billion it's pledged to sort out public sector pay disputes. And that is £14 billion more than the previous government had factored in. However, under the previous government's plans, well, unprotected budgets, things like courts and prisons, they actually were due for a cut in real terms in their budget. And if the Chancellor wants to protect those budgets from inflation, she's going to have to find an additional £16 billion on top of the £14 billion. However, for some people who voted for Labour, even that wouldn't be considered generous enough. If the Chancellor wants to offer a bigger package of government spending, well, she could consider protecting those budgets as a share of national income. But in order to do that, she will have to find an additional £17 billion, so £47 billion more than the previous government had factored in. And she can't simply fund that through extra borrowing, because it looks like she's going to stick to her fiscal rule to have this type of spending only covered by tax receipts. So how much wiggle room does she actually have? Well, let's have a look at those scenarios that I just outlined for you. And as you can see, in most of them, she should be fine. She's not recording a deficit, helped by the fact that Labour have already pledged to increase taxes by £9 billion in their manifesto. However, in the final scenario, if she wants to protect spending as a share of national income, she's going to have to find £16 billion in tax increases. That's on top of the £9 billion already outlined in the manifesto. So £25 billion in total, which is only going to add to a tax burden that is already at a generational high. So no easy answers for the Chancellor, only difficult political choices lie ahead.
All right, let's bring in Caroline and Salma again, shall we? Salma, only difficult choices ahead. What are you hoping to see in the budget?
Well, I mean, unfortunately, I think we're going to have bad news. And the whole summer, the run-up to the budget has been about preparing the nation for bad news. There's talk of a £22 billion black hole, everybody talking about, the legacy we were left, our inheritance, etc. And, big spending departments like Wes Streetings, the new health secretary, him talking constantly about, prevention and other things that you're going to have to do with the health service. So I don't think there is going to be any good news. And I wouldn't even know where to begin to try and advise the Chancellor to find us some good news.
Bit gloomy. What are you as gloomy as that, Caroline?
Well, I think there's always a lot being pinned on a budget of any Chancellor, but obviously there's been a lot happening in the first 100 days that has put even more pressure on that because, in the last 100 days, there's been a lot of things that have been a bit destabilising for the honeymoon of the government, have knocked out other potential good stories that could have been talked about rather than freebies and everything else going on and war at number 10 and all of that. So the pressure was on there to start, even more pressure is there now. And, having, started after the election, quite rightly, I have to say, I think when you win an election, part of it is to say, this is what they've left us and everything else, unless you're coming on from another Labour government. But actually now, with the Institute of Fiscal Studies saying that actually you're going to need another 5 billion to meet the needs, it does put the pressure on. So everybody, because we've had this long period, has been trying to fill the gap with what they think Labour will come up with. It'll be interesting to see what happens on that and whether some of those suggestions aren't going to happen. But I think it is interesting around some of the debate we've had in recent days about national insurance going up on employers, but then we go back to the question about how do you balance that in terms of employers and growth. But also, I do think that in terms of the sort of infrastructure we need in capital spending, because I think that does contribute to growth, and therefore I think something that would sort of maybe loosen some of those rules to allow the chance to do that but it's got to be clear what it's going to be spent on and to what aim.
But Caroline, the problem is that if you do anything that looks like, around capital gains. So Sir Nigel Wilson, who is a city grandee, did a report on, how much money we basically need in order to plug the gap between what public sector spends and what you need for all infrastructure and things like that. It's £1 trillion, OK? The only way you are going to get that kind of private capital to come here is if you offer some kind of tax break. I would love to see that. I would love to see a Labour Chancellor selling that at the dispatch box.
OK, so that's where the whole package, how does it come together? Where are the incentives, but also the certainty that the money that might be pulled together through some more borrowing and investment also will make a difference. And the choices they make about what that money may be spent off, if she goes down that line, to actually create growth is going to be key.
Sam, on the changing of the rules, because in some ways I hate these discussions before budget because we don't know what's going to happen. No. But the one thing it does feel like might happen is the change to the debt rules, so they effectively, count building a hospital or whatever as part of the debt rule as an asset. What do you think on that? Do you think that would be a good idea?
No, it's very difficult because people talk about capital expenditure as if it's like the same as it is in the private sector. It's an asset only if you can sell it. Nobody's going to be selling schools and hospitals, so you can say that it's capital spending in government terms because you're spending it on a thing, but to realise its value, you would have to sell it. So you have to ask yourself the question, do you actually want to do something that helps you lift your tax receipts as opposed to being able to get more money in order to funnel it into what effectively is something that's never going to give you a return? What if you borrowed, instead of spending it on schools and hospitals, spending it on transport infrastructure, which means that you create productivity and increase those receipts?
Okay, we're out of time. Really interesting debate, though. Thank you both very much indeed. Still to come on the Politics Hub. Who lasted longer in the top job? Was it the former PM Liz Truss, or was it Sam Allardyce as England football manager? As Labour approach their first 100 days in power, we're going to be testing our panel, a few gasps there, on a few other things that didn't quite make it to the milestone.
Coming up on the UK Tonight at 8, we'll have the latest from Southport as the Prince and Princess of Wales make their first public appearance together since Catherine's cancer diagnosis. I'll be talking to the Olympian Becky Adlington about the importance of specialist support for those who suffer baby loss. And Black Panther actor Letitia Wright will tell us all about her new film exploring the inequalities in the foster care system. All that and much more on the UK Tonight at 8.
I'm Katie Spencer and I'm Sky News' arts and entertainment correspondent. When you think of Glastonbury, it's mud you want and music. They're going to cross to us live in a minute. Okay. Thank you so much. Brad Pitt is now a prolific producer behind the scenes.
It's not a mystery to me. We always were capable of doing this.
Oh, they're wonderful children as an audience.
Who did that? Maverick here on the red carpet. I'm so excited, Tom Cruise. This is the story of the night.
It's the little independent film that could.
We take you to the heart of the stories that shape our world.
Nor have I ever struck any woman in my life.
There's this illusion of power.
Are you feeling well?
I remember covering the Oscars and that now infamous moment, the Will Smith slap. Nobody could quite believe that it had happened. You can tell from these crowds just how excited people are for the return of Bryant.
These actors playing the lead roles were born long after the Sex Pistols broke up.
Are you pleased that you did say yes to the job?
I've never regretted it.
As a team, we've interviewed some of the biggest stars in the world. It can be incredibly surreal being swept up in their world, but we try to give you an honest sense of how these people really are.
OK, I'll talk to you.
Don't leave me!
Yeah, OK.
There's no easy goodies. There's no easy baddies.
I've had a great time here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
We're rolling.
Welcome to the world.
Our new podcast. It's starting now. It's very exciting.
Every week, we'll be reporting from the world's trouble spots.
We get to hold those in positions of power accountable, and we get to ask the questions that the audience, the listeners, want to know about.
And that's why it is so important that people tune in, come along for the road, come along for the journey. It'll be fun.
Hello, welcome back to the Politics Hub. Now, this Saturday marks Keir Starmer's government's 100th day in office. Now, it feels like a lot has happened since the 4th of July, and all of it completely as the government would have planned. But there are some people and events that didn't even make it to the 100-day mark. Some got closer than others, though. So we thought it was a good enough reason for a little quiz for our panel. First 100 days, the quiz. Right, we're going to start off with, right, the one thing that lots of us know the answer to. Liz Truss's premiership. Do you remember how many days Liz Truss lasted?
49.
It was indeed. It was 49 days that she lasted as Prime Minister. And now, the point of the quiz is you've got to say higher. Is it higher or is it lower?
Okay,
so 49 days, right?
Thank you.
Higher or lower? Allardyce's England exit.
Lower.
Lower.
Was that more or less than 49 days?
Less.
Less.
Go on, how many? Give us a guess. What do you reckon?
I think
25?
Yeah. 25. I think he only lasted like a week.
You know what? It was a lot longer than that. He actually beat Liz Truss.
Wow.
He managed 67 days.
Gosh.
As
Sorry,
England
Sam.
manager.
Sorry, Sam.
Sorry, Sam.
Right, higher or lower? The 2012 Olympic torch relay. So the Olympic torch travelled 8,000 miles around the UK before making it to the Olympic Stadium.
Wow.
But was it higher or lower than 67 days?
I feel like it was like, it took like the whole summer to do it. Do you remember there was
So more
always,
than,
like,
I think it's
on the
higher
news?
because we had it come through Doncaster at one point.
So what do you think? We're going higher?
I'm going higher.
It was higher. It was 70 days. So just higher. Right. The first UK COVID lockdown, was it higher or lower than 70 days?
Lower.
Higher.
It was actually the same, so it's a bit of a trick.
Oh, that's not fair.
70 days the first UK lockdown lasted, even though it felt like about 700. Right, Bohemian Rhapsody at number 1.
I think
higher.
Yeah, I think it was at least was it about 20 weeks or something. I think higher than 70 days. Yes, higher.
It was a great song, and it was definitely deserved to be at number 1 longer than 70 days.
Yeah.
It deserved to be. I agree with that,
and it
actually was not. Sorry, it lasted 63 days.
Oh, 9 weeks
at number 1. 9
weeks. It seemed longer.
It was pretty good though. That's not bad.
What
9
year
weeks.
was that?
And finally, higher or lower? The plot of Romeo and Juliet.
Oh, did it go over?
How many days did Romeo and Juliet last?
Quiz.
So
This
they
is
met
Emily
and
Kinder,
they fell in
amazing
love,
producer.
and then they.
What do you reckon? How many days?
Wow.
Lower.
Lower.
It was only 5 days. There you go. What a quiz. Thank you both very much.
You didn't do too bad.
I think that was pretty good. Not bad at all. Thanks both. Thank you so much, Caroline
You're welcome.
and Sam. Thanks for watching as well. Have a great weekend. I'll see you on Monday at 7. Up next, it is the UK Tonight with Sarah, Jane, me. And then, of course, at 9 p.m, you've got The World with Yalda Hakeem. See you Monday.